GM Farcaster. It is. We are back. Actually, I should say it's still, not it is. September 13th, and happy Friday. We are here with a very special guest, Dan Romero, DWR, and we're so happy to have you here to help us celebrate our 1 year birthday and chat a little bit about all things Farcaster. How are you doing today, GM?
Good. Thanks for having me, and congratulations on 1 year.
Thank you. We did have a fun trivia question earlier. We did a little trivia game with some of our usual chatters, and one of the questions was, what did Dan and Baroon say when we told them we were starting a morning show all about Farcaster and asked their permission for it? And the answer was, trick question. We didn't ask.
I was about to say, it feels very permissionless.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, we didn't ask. We just kind of did it and hopes you didn't mind. So Adrian, I'm going to let you kick it off because I know you got some questions ready to go.
You would think so. Yeah. No, just Dan, third time back together. So thanks always for coming in. I think we just wanted to chat and just, I guess, start off, but how are you?
I'm well. I can't complain.
And I want to add on to that because I was about to ask you this when I first saw you, but how was Farcaster Friday? So you were at the live one in LA. So how did that go? What'd you think?
Farcaster Fridays was great. It was, I think, 15 plus cities, 300 plus people. Ted kind of led the initiative, but it was really driven by a bunch of people all across the world, which was really great. And I mean, we've talked about this in the past. We talked about it at FarCon. I'm sure you guys talked about it, but this idea of URL to IRL, I think it is one of the kind of more interesting things about Farcaster relative to other social networks, social media, at least in 2024. I think like most social media, is media, not a network. And you kind of hang out with existing friends on it, right? So like you might join TikTok or Instagram, and the primary, you have stories with Instagram, but for the most part, like you're consuming content in a feed that is professionally produced, and it's very clear the button that is in like kind of like the spot where we have they have DM, which is kind of like a message your friends. And I think what's neat about Farcaster is people meet new people, like-minded people. And so it's actually something that I think we're doubling down on a little bit in terms of like our near-term product strategy is to kind of try to lean into like, can you meet and make new friends on the internet? I think it's a little tricky because, sorry, I'm like starting to ramble beyond the Farcaster Friday.
No, it's good because I was like, I like where you were going. I like where you're going to like
I think it's
explain more as to what you mean. Yeah.
If you were to ask most people on the street, like, are you interested in watching like highly entertaining and interesting content? For the most part, they'd say, sure. That is like a relative thing, right? It's like what's interesting or entertaining to you versus me might be different. But I think universally, like people that they do that. It just depends on where they do it, right? Whether it's Netflix or you like to read a book or, you watch hours of Reels or TikTok. That's a very, very common thing. If you were to ask someone on the street, it's like, hey, do you want to download an app to meet new people and make friends? Most adults would tell you no. Like they'd be like, I don't need new friends. Like what are you, what like weird, like snake oil are you selling me? And so I think it's a little bit of a harder sell because I don't think most people think that is something that they want or it is a problem. But if you can figure that out, which is like, okay, it's kind of like that South Park thing where it's just like the underpants gnomes, like there's like the big question mark in the middle and then you have profit. If you can figure out how to position that or kind of build the right set of products and protocol primitives so other developers can build their own apps that do that, you actually have a pretty enduring, valuable thing for the protocol that will keep people around and then keep people really motivated about telling people like, oh, you have to get on Farcaster. It's so amazing. And so I think that ties all the way back to Farcaster Fridays is that when people meet each other in person, that connection becomes, I think, significantly stronger, whether that's 2x or 10x, who knows, but why FarCon was so important, right? And I think like shows like what you guys are doing and OK Banger, like the idea of like this kind of emerging creator ecosystem within Farcaster that is not just broadcast, which you get on a place like Instagram or Twitter, and is a little bit more community, like sub-community oriented, where it's like you have your set of loyal fans who, and I'm on the streaming software, I don't even see the chat, but like I'm
I
assuming
know.
people in a chat right now, but like that is a really powerful thing. And like, so I think everything we can do both product wise to help foster that, but also, kind of ecosystem culturally, that's useful. And so Farcaster Fridays very much fits into that theme.
And I think like the other thing that's been really interesting within Farcaster is not just Adrian and I, but many co-founders have met on Farcaster, and many or people that are doing working together in projects and business and in all these different things, in DAOs, all that. So there's a lot of connections that were made. Even a few people dating, I think, who have met on via Farcaster. So there's a few of those situations that I think are interesting as well. And I do think that it lends itself to that, but it is hard to extrapolate that out into a growth strategy, I think. I did listen quickly to the dev call, the part about channels yesterday, and I'd love to see if you could, it sounds like that might be part of this overall thinking. What are you thinking about for changes to channels or development on channels, and where is that going, and how will that change up what we're doing now?
Yeah, so kind of history channels, launched them last summer. We've done a bunch of iterations and experiments with channels. I don't think any of them have quite worked outside of people on the network. And if you were to kind of take the subjective, you decide, but the top 1,000 most interesting accounts on the network, the rate of those accounts participating in channels is really high. So we've actually, the behavior on the network was plastic enough to like kind of get people to do it, as much as people resisted posting in channels when we first launched them, in a way that I think is really positive, because if you can do that, then there's still a chance that if you can get the right configuration of what a channel feels like, it can actually be a really powerful primitive for growing the protocol and then specifically deepening those relationships, which I think is the thing we kind of want to bet on. So I think where we've missed with channels is they've tried to do too much. I think if you can kind of think of it as like two camps, like one is the hashtag general topic idea, like food or gardening or Ethereum. It's like these massive topics, like with tons of people interested in them. And you have good, like people and content getting posted, but there's also just a lot of like kind of like mid content or just like AI program, like programmatic content, like, and we're getting better at filtering out the like clear egregious versions of spam, but it's very hard to actually programmatically decide like, is this interesting or not without people liking it. But if the content is mid, then people aren't likely to go to the channel to like it. So therefore you don't actually get the signal. So it kind of creates this tragedy of the commons almost, if you think of shared space. And so I think that there's another set of channels that within the kind of same primitive that we've had, Late Night Crew, Ted, GM Farcaster has a channel, right? So you're actually building more of a community. It's less a kind of like, hey, I'm generally interested in this, I want to find other people. It's actually more of like, no, there's a vibe here, or there's a group of people that have a collective set of interests. And it's a little harder as a new user to figure that out. But if you do, it feels more special, right? Like Six is a great example of a personal channel, right? Which again, we never thought people would do that. And then as soon as we allowed people to create channels, they started creating personal channels. Six is it's like a vibe. Like why does Woj post a product take in Six? You have to ask him. Like, but it's just like it's a public group chat, right? And so there's this idea that like, oh, I saw something. This group of people over here, this is the one I want to actually have the conversation with. And you do that in messaging apps all the time, but it's not public. And so I think that is the more interesting of the two directions for channels. And in a world where we were trying to kind of make both of them work, I think it just like kind of didn't, like if you try to please everyone, it's just not going to work. And so I think we are going to be more explicit and say, we want to head in a direction where cozy corners is the term we use, but it's let people create communities essentially, or like these vibes, public group chats, whatever you want to call them, that aren't as we've been accused of like Christian rap, like, oh, it just feels like a crypto version of LinkedIn, but like there's a certain aspect of like a irreverent channel in some ways is actually more valuable to the network in terms of building culture and kind of like this idea of building friendships than something that's like highly serious. And so, and I'm as guilty as anyone because I've been trying to kind of push it. It's like you have channels like product and founders that are kind of not sterile, but like they feel a little bit more like, again, LinkedIn-y. And I think what's interesting is actually a lot of people tell me that founders, Linda has been very vocal about this, is like, actually it's kind
Super
of like a
useful.
support group in the sense of other people
Yep.
kind of going through that journey and whatever. And so there is value there, but like the value is in the community, not the content, if anything.
Yeah.
Like, and so I think that again says like the topic itself is less interesting. You don't want the Twitter like thought influencer who's like giving you like, here's 10 quotes about Steve Jobs, a product philosophy.
No, we don't want
Founders
that.
or whatever. It's just like, no, I don't want that. I want the commentary from other people and the other people who are kind of going through a similar journey to me. So that's
I loved
the
using
high level spiritual idea behind like channels. There's now naturally a strategy and a set of features that we can actually go do. But I think if I was, the one critique I would have had of myself yesterday is like maybe previewing it in the dev call to only then have it get onto Farcaster because it's recorded and then people being like, change, oh no, bad. Whereas like actually let's start with like kind of where we are today, and then like what is the thing we actually want to make a bet on. People naturally always just go, okay, what does that mean in terms of like specific changes, right?
Right. And I think with something like Founders, I find that to be a super useful channel because of like, I went in there one day and said, hey, as we're growing, I'm thinking about, do we need an advisory board? And my initial gut was like, probably not. And then that got very confirmed but very specifically and with examples and with people's experiences. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I don't need an advisory board because I have the Founders channel. Like that's, I just got what I needed, what I would have used it for. So I think there's a lot of channels like that as well, that you're right. It depends on who is in there and participating that makes the value of it. Something like Tabletop, I think has huge potential and just hasn't quite found it yet, but is like, that to me is one of those ones that with this new direction that might really benefit for that and growing the community.
Yeah, and to be specific on a couple of changes that I mentioned and maybe are being misunderstood a little bit. So the first direction we're headed is so channels are, the best way to think about them are public group chats that have a very similar mechanic to like a clubhouse stage or tavern or kind of any space where you have people on stage and you have people in the audience, right? And so anyone can participate in terms of like listening, or I guess that's not participation, that's just listening. And then the people who have the ability to speak are curated by host, moderator, whatever you want to call them. And so basically that's what we want to be explicit with. Will there be ways that people can kind of like figure it out, make it like more open, accessible? Sure. And actually part of making it programmable, like, will allow people to be really creative with that. But I think we want to be opinionated and say, rather than you pick what kind of channel you want, we kind of are like, this is what a channel is. It's like you actually want to curate who is on stage, because that will lead to a tighter knit community and higher quality discussion, which makes people more likely to want to go to a channel page and like all these things that kind of don't happen now. And then the second thing, which again would probably be on the more radical side of things of just like how things have been, but for people who have been around, this is actually how channels started. If you don't follow the channel, you won't see channel content from that channel. So I think one thing that's confusing to people in a world where we really tried to use channels as a way to like grow distribution, we have the, in the preview, it's like, if you don't post in a channel, you post in a channel, get more views. Like the whole goal was like, try to get people to post in channels because that's actually good for growth of the network. I don't actually think that mentality is useful. If anything, it actually confuses people. And if you actually ask new people, they're like, I don't understand when should I post in a channel versus not? So I think just super simplified, post in a channel if you want to talk to that group chat. And if you want megaphone, just post in your home channel. Now, obviously, some really large channels are going to have potentially more distribution for you than your follower account, especially as a newer account. So that can still make sense. But I think like just to simplify the framework of like, goes out to all my followers over here. It goes out to literally the people who follow it over here. It's actually like, I think a much simpler mental model. And so those are the two, I think, like fundamental changes to like how it, and obviously any client could go implement it any way they want. Woj can do whatever he wants on that. But I think the way Warpcast takes the opinionated approach and says, this is what we think a channel should be at the protocol level, and we're going to respect that, will have a pretty big impact in terms of the shape of that feature. And so I think there will be some change. There will be some channels that like, hey, this worked way better when it was like open access. I didn't have to worry about it. But we'll kind of iterate our way through that. And it's not a change we're dropping tomorrow. It's like over the next few weeks, we're going to like kind of put more effort into this launch than we actually do for most launches. Like we're pretty famous for being really iterative and just like, okay, fresh off the presses, like ship it. But I think really going through every bit of surface area around channels and say, should we keep this? Should we remove it or change it? Is like part of the review here. And so the goal should be whenever we get to the point of like launching this new version of channels, it should feel different for people. And like that actually is important for this whole thing to work. Because if it just feels too iterative, people are just going to keep the same habits they had before.
So just to clarify, if I cast something in a channel, only the people who are following the channel are going to see that. My followers will not see it in their feed. Is that correct? With this new iteration?
Well, if your followers also follow the channel, yes. But
right.
You can think of it as like you're opting in, right, to that vibe, topic, whatever, however you want to describe it, right? And so part of that is like we need to improve discovery. We need to improve it so that
would be my next question. Yeah.
Channel owners and moderators, like we'll likely bring back more moderators. Like that was a mess up. I tried to simplify it down to one, and people actually kind of like the collective idea of having 10 people. But you know, you make mistakes. So I think it's like really cultivate this idea that there's like a shared community identity thing that people are building together, and then give people the tools to actually make their space feel great, and then find other people to bring into their community. And so like there's just a lot of details to sort out, and so I don't want people to over rotate and be like, fear, change, bad. But I think I'm optimistic that we can get to a place where it actually is just a lot clearer for people, and then like once they adjust to the new model, they're like, actually this is pretty great, right? Like think about how many people want channel mute, and we've never launched it. Yeah. By definition, this is muted. If you don't follow channel, you won't see the content.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
I saw Nat Eliason cast that literally like I think half an hour ago. It was like, hey, it'd be cool if I could mute a channel. Like, we've heard that before. I like from the way you describe it, Dan, I like the direction because it, you know, in terms of cozy corners and opting in I think the analogy to like a tavern or farmhouse where, you know, it's you can kind of curate. I think all makes sense once you're in a channel, once you've developed the relationships, and then what has to be solved separately is like the discovery. How do I find new channels I don't already know about? Because I always think about kind of narrow casting into this versus sometimes I want to know channels. I love when I see people cast and mention a channel I've never heard of, because then it kind of brings me into discovery. And then the ability to make new friends and like bring, you know, new people in the network, and not just like the first time you go to a farmhouse, you're probably not like, hey, bring me on stage, because you don't know who I am or where I'm coming from. So kind of how do you create like that sandbox where you can still meet new people? Yeah,
I think like I don't know if you guys, when, you know, if the analogy for me is like going to college and you go to the activity day, like the first day as a freshman, and you find all of the things you could potentially do in college. Or then if like, and I wasn't in a fraternity, but like there's like the whole Greek scene is like, it's like people try to sort you into as many different things as soon as you show up to this new, effectively social network, right? Like,
so we need channel rush is what you're saying. We need a rush for channels.
But I think like, that's overwhelming. And going back to this idea of like, most people signing up for this don't actually think they're looking for new friends. They're coming to a social app because they're like, oh, social media, like interesting content. So I think that there's like a kind of set of ways of like basically getting people excited about, you know, channels or going deeper. And so one way you can think about it is you start following people because you find that their takes in the home feed are interesting. that's like pretty normal. That's pretty comparable to Twitter. And then naturally the app can, or whatever app you're using, can actually start to be a little bit more like, hey, like looks like you really find, Adrienne to be interesting, like you're interacting with their content at home. By the way, she's active in these channels, like maybe you should go check those out, right? So it like, I think we can, this is key, is like you have to improve the discovery process. Like, I mean, the channels list today, like the descriptions are not even there. Like we haven't changed it since last year. So putting a little bit of TLC into the method for discovery, and there can be a variety of them, I think is important. And I think like you guys have actually brought this up in terms of like the explore page for developers is like, hey, there are content creators on the network that are more than just casting. It's like putting out a daily podcast and or streaming or whatever. And I think that there's a natural fit there with channels, because channels, like effectively when you're building a media property, most of the time you're trying to actually build a community. And so you can imagine the kind of like Farcaster native creators, their channels being featured on kind of like channel discovery. That has actually a better, rather than trying to like put apps and content in the same thing. It's like, no, this is where I go when I want to find kind of like communities and interesting things to go participate in. And then this is like apps that I can specifically use. And there's a little bit of blending between the two, but that's like one way to think about it. But I think this only works if we improve discovery, right? Like we can't just, the primary way to discover channels today is in the home feed. And so if you're taking that away from by default, you have to kind of offer other tools so that channels actually can find the like-minded people.
And I think that's a great point regarding like media content. Channels is the perfect place for that. That's why we were kind of struggling. It's like, well, we can create an app or we can create a frame, but it's not really what we want to do. Like we want to just be able to have them discover the channel, because then it's going to have all the content. It's going to have everything we want them to see. And also it's going to be the thing that spurs discussion and connections and conversation that can emanate from that content and that media. And I think you see that in our channel, you see it in OK Banger, you see it in Late Night Crew, you see it in all these different media channels already, where there's a lot of discussion that pops off based on that content. Go ahead.
Can I give a shout out? There's a ton of questions coming in, like literal specific, like how exactly will this work? And I think just to, and Dan, you can answer this, but just I could probably take it, which is spec is not written yet. This is a concept and a product direction. These guys move very fast and will iterate and we'll put some thought in it. But they're also have been very transparent. So kind of specs are usually public. There's dev calls, there's recordings, like take some time. You can chat about it on Farcaster. But I don't think there's really answers to exactly how things are working.
Yeah, I think it's like really fluid, right? Like I'm meeting with the team and the other thing I said on the dev call is, so traditionally it's been one engineer plus me anytime we do stuff with channels. We have two engineers plus our wonderful designer and myself. So it's actually a big investment for our relatively small team in Merkle, because we got a lot of things going on.
Yeah.
And so this is a like top priority for the company. Like we have our daily stand up for the whole team. And it's like the first thing we talk about is what's the progress on, kind of like towards this version of channels. So I'm kind of like working on a public spec, like getting feedback, from people, and I think should have something next week that people can roughly understand. I think the other thing too is change is always scary. Like it's just like, okay, like wait, like some people like change, but like I think most people by default are like change is bad because I'm used to this other thing. Yeah. And I hear that, but at the same time, like I think we really have to figure out like to make channels something that's actually really useful for the network versus just this like thing that people call it like underinvested in or whatever critique they want. I think it's like fair, but I think the reality is like we should just have a very opinionated point of view of like this is what a channel is good for, and we can solve some of the other things that we're potentially moving away from in future product launches or iterations or things like that.
Yeah, so Adrienne, I do agree. Let's hold off on the questions that are more specific to like process of channels and things like that we don't really have answers for. But I do love this one from Miriam. And there's a similar one from Ivy on the Unlonely chat. And Ivy's posing it as, assuming channels were deemed a success tomorrow, what's the next primitive you would work on? And from Miriam, I asked this Dan AMA, but does he ever have dreams about Farcaster or figure out solution to stuff in his dreams? So I like both of these questions.
Let's start with the dreams. I don't know if dreams are the right term. They happen while I sleep. Sometimes you might call those nightmares, but yes, I think there have been many a night where I can't sleep thinking about Farcaster. How about that? So I am trying to sleep and I end up spending time thinking about Farcaster, but for better or for worse, I'm not asleep. I'm sitting there in bed thinking about what should we be doing? I think that's
I think that's all. I think that's every founder everywhere.
Yeah. I think
anywhere. And then with Ivy would be if channels are success, and what's the next big primitive that you would want to work on beyond that?
Yeah. So I mean, that's like it's like Bill Belichick, for those who are football fans, he would always just tell you he only cares about the next football game coming up. Yeah. And so I think I'm very focused on channels. If you were to really push me, I think that there's probably we're already doing it with the stuff that HorseFax is working on the developer side. So this idea of mini apps, and so we're kind of inching towards that. So that is a surface area for people, but probably more limited. Although AI tools probably make it easy to make mini apps. I just watched someone on OpenAI make a game with one prompt, and so if you think of Flappy Caster from Matthew Fox, which is pretty good, we're not too far off in the next year or two where you could just be I have an idea for a mini app, and you could literally probably code it. And I'm sure, DF and Stefan are building stuff that make it easier to build frames and stuff like that. And so I think that's a whole area that still has plenty of exploration. I think if you were to ask me the core social stuff, I think the honest answer is we need to get channels right. And then move on to, I think, figuring out how we're going to do DCs from a protocol standpoint. So that's, again, less individuals, but more can I use these in other apps? How can I make them more programmable? So outside of something brilliant that just someone suggests or, comes to you in the shower, I think right now it's just focus on channels. We have a kind of side bet on mini apps. We also, by the way, have this big snap chain thing that we're going to be probably doing at the protocol level, which day-to-day users don't experience, but any developer in the ecosystem who's had a issue with us syncing with Nanar or Supercast or anything like that is going to be happy. But that's a significant amount of work. So we're only 14 people, so we have to be pretty focused on what we're working on.
All right, I know we're getting down to it. Adrian, any last questions before we say goodbye to Dan?
Just the burning one, and Dan, I need eye contact so we can tell with your tell. Do you know who Dan Romero is?
Oh, nice.
I do not.
Yes, you do, because you just looked up at your tell.
I do not. I actually don't know who Dan Romero is.
I was convinced that it was you. So, or that it was.
If I had an alt, it would be funnier. I'm a little insulted, that people think that that's my alt. I think my alt would be funnier. No, Dan Romero it serves a purpose in the ecosystem, but you can't be encouraging all these alt accounts. They're funny for a second, and then they can kind of veer a little too negative. So
yeah, unfortunately, when they get a little nasty, there's been a couple that I haven't really enjoyed that much. But Rand's been pretty much keeping it funny most of the time. So
yeah, falling off a bit. I mean, in terms of just posting pace, but
anything else, Adrian? We gotta let him go.
Yeah.
No, I think we'll let you go. I know you've got places to be, but thanks for hanging out.
Thanks so much. And we're going to just do a little bit of wrap up, but thank you so much. We love having you here. Anytime you want to come back, you're always welcome.
And we love
and thank you for
if we don't tell you
letting
enough.
us do a permissionless show.
I don't think the letting you part is part of the permissionless.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Bye, Dan.
Bye, Dan. Thank you. That was fun. Lots of good new info.
We did ask him if anyone's allowed to build a client.
Yes,
you are.
Yes, you are. Actually, he highly encourages it. That was great. Really interesting to hear what's coming next with channels. I'm glad to see some development there. Change is always scary, but I think it seems like a direction that's going to be really helpful. So we'll see. Wait and see.
What I think is interesting is when he said we're actually going to be thoughtful about this, you know, which is a nod to how fast they typically try to just put things out, like throw it out. But I think it's kind of like the first time they're
mindful and demure, a little bit,
very mindful.
Little.
I think it's because channels already exist. So when you're throwing something new, right, it's recognizing people are using it. How do you change? And I think that's also why startups tend to work a lot faster. But when you're trying to change something existing, it's a lot more complicated because you've got
Absolutely.
people.
Absolutely. So want to just highlight a few things we have left going on today. We are going to be here until tomorrow morning. With a few breaks in between. Sometimes it'll be us in pre-recorded replay mode, but we will be streaming all day long. And we are celebrating our birthday today. There is a mint that is available right now on Highlight, and you can go to the GM Farcaster channel to mint this amazing little fun token of our appreciation and token of your appreciation of us. And we are going to have some fun things built into this NFT. And currently, we do have a leader on the leaderboard. Thanks, yes, to crypto. We'll be giving you something special. Should that hold, even if it doesn't hold, we're giving you something special. If you want to see the full schedule, it is in the GM Farcaster channel and also on events.xyz for the GM Farcaster channel. So you can take a look at that. Coming up in a half hour, we have the State of Farcaster report from Snickerdoodle that they have been putting together, combining on-chain data of Farcaster users and their own surveys that they've been doing and collecting that data. And this is going to be all put together in one big report. And we're going to have a sneak peek of that coming up at 12:30 Eastern. So about 28 minutes from now. Adrian, what else did we need to tell the folks?
Just like really come back for the State of Farc, like the preview of the State of Farcaster report. It's going to drop, I think, next week. So I imagine it'll get a lot of attention next week, but come for the preview because Prof and I got a little sneak peek yesterday, and it's good. Very impressive.
It's really interesting. Yeah, it's really interesting. There's some interesting points there, but just overall, the whole thing is very well done, and I'm excited to see what comes next. So
and then we've got Base Builder Hour later. We've got Noun O'Clock. We have Purple Hour. What else? Poker.
I'm trying to pull up all of our stuff here.
There's a lot of fun things.
There's going to be a lot. There's going to be so much. And you can go to, let me just show this on the screen because I'm not coming up with the one I was looking for. But if you go into the GM Farcaster channel, you'll see the pinned post has a whole list within the replies of each of the different segments that we're doing. And then again, you can go right to events.xyz to find all of them. So looking forward to chatting with Snickerdoodle in just a little bit. And then we're going to follow that up with Base Builders, with Noun O'Clock, then Base Builders, then Purple Hour, on and on. So we're going to take a little quick break and get ready for the State of Farcaster. So come on back in just a few minutes and we'll see you then. All right, everybody. Bye-bye.